Today we're taking a walk through some of the most storied cemeteries in the Hollywood hills and valleys, and we're doing it with a particular eye toward the monuments themselves. Because in this town, even the final resting place can be a production. The tombs, crypts, and memorials we'll visit today range from intimate marble markers to six-figure architectural spectacles visible from the freeway. Along the way, we'll meet 20 legends, actors, singers, directors, comedians, and hear the stories behind the stones that mark where they sleep. Let's begin right here, at one of the oldest cemeteries in Los Angeles, Hollywood Forever, on Santa Monica Boulevard, with the walls of Paramount Studios rising just beyond the southern fence. Our first stop is one you simply cannot miss. It's the grandest monument in this entire cemetery. A marble sarcophagus set before a classical Greek wall, with a long reflecting pool stretching out in front of it like a red carpet made of water. This is the final resting place of Douglas Fairbanks Sr., the original swashbuckler of the silver screen. In the 1920s, nobody was bigger. He was the action hero before the term existed, leaping, climbing, sword-fighting his way through the Mark of Zorro, the Three Musketeers, Robin Hood, and the Thief of Baghdad. Off-screen, Fairbanks was just as ambitious. He co-founded United Artists in 1919 alongside Charlie Chaplin, D.W. Griffith, and his wife Mary Pickford. He also served as the first president of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, the organization that gives out the Oscars. When Fairbanks died of a heart attack in his sleep in 1939, at just 56, his widow Sylvia commissioned this monument. By the time it was completed and dedicated in 1941, it had cost $50,000, which made it the most expensive monument in all of Southern California at the time. Adjusted for inflation, that's well over $1 million today. Summer evenings, the lawn in front of his memorial becomes an outdoor cinema, with movies projected onto the white marble wall of the adjacent mausoleum. Fairbanks, who helped invent the movies, now hosts them in perpetuity. From Hollywood Forever, we're heading south and west to Culver City, and a cemetery perched on green, rolling hills just off the San Diego freeway. This is Hillside Memorial Park, and if you've ever driven the 405 through this stretch, you've already seen our next stop. You just may not have known what you were looking at. High on a hill, visible for miles, stands a towering marble structure with a cascading waterfall pouring down the slope beneath it. This is the Jolson Memorial, and it is, without exaggeration, the most spectacular celebrity grave in the United States. Jolson was the man who changed everything. In 1927, he starred in The Jazz Singer, the first feature-length motion picture with synchronized dialogue. When he looked into the camera and ad-libbed the words, "You ain't heard nothin' yet," he wasn't just talking to the audience, he was talking to the entire future of entertainment. Before talkies, Jolson had already been one of the biggest stars on Broadway, known for electrifying performances of songs like Mammy, Swanee, and April Showers. His career faded in the 30s, but roared back in 1946 when Columbia Pictures released The Jolson Story, a biopic that introduced him to a whole new generation. He spent his final years entertaining troops overseas, first in World War II, then during the Korean War. In October 1950, shortly after returning from Korea, Jolson was playing cards with friends in a San Francisco hotel room when he suffered a massive heart attack. He was 64. His widow, Early, was determined to give him a memorial worthy of his legend. She hired Paul R. Williams, the famed African-American architect, to design it. A judge had to approve the $84,000 expenditure from Jolson's estate, a staggering sum in 1951. The result is a 75-foot-tall open rotunda built from 16 types of imported Italian marble, topped with a mosaic dome. A bronze statue nearby depicts Jolson in his signature pose, down on one knee, arms outstretched. A 5-tier water cascade, 120 feet long, spills down the hillside below the sarcophagus. The dedication ceremony in September of 1951 drew thousands, with Jack Benny delivering the eulogy. Even today, More than 7 decades later, you can spot the Jolson Memorial from the freeway, gleaming white against the green hillside. Nothing else in Hollywood comes close. Now let's head over to one of the smallest and most unassuming cemeteries in Los Angeles, Westwood Village Memorial Park, tucked behind high-rise office buildings on Wilshire Boulevard. You'd never guess this tiny plot, barely 2.5 acres, holds some of the biggest names in entertainment history. And no one draws more visitors than the woman whose crypt is along the north wall. Marilyn Monroe. Born Norma Jean Mortensen, she rose from a childhood in foster homes to become the most iconic sex symbol of the 20th century. Gentlemen prefer blondes, some like it hot, the 7-year itch. Her comedic timing was impeccable, and her screen presence was something that couldn't be taught or duplicated. She received a Golden Globe for her work in Some Like It Hot, and delivered a dramatic performance in The Misfits that showed the range critics sometimes denied her. Her personal life was turbulent. Marriages to baseball legend Joe DiMaggio and playwright Arthur Miller, rumored entanglements with the most powerful men in the country, and a long struggle with depression and prescription drugs. On August 4, 1962, she was found dead in her Brentwood home from an overdose of barbiturates. She was only 36. Joe DiMaggio, who never stopped loving her, arranged her funeral and had roses delivered to her crypt 3 times a week for the next 20 years. Her resting place here became so famous that the crypt directly above hers sold at auction for $4.6 million, making it quite possibly the most expensive single burial plot ever sold. The cemetery itself is modest, almost cozy, but Monroe's presence transforms it into a pilgrimage site. Fans leave lipstick kisses, letters, and flowers at her marker every single day. From the glamour of Monroe, let's shift to something a little more playful. We're heading back to Hollywood forever, to the Beth Olam section, the Jewish cemetery within the larger grounds. Here lies Mel Blanc, and if you don't recognize his face, you absolutely know his voice. Mel Blanc was the man behind Bugs Bunny, Daffy Duck, Porky Pig, Tweety Bird, Sylvester the Cat, Yosemite Sam, Foghorn Leghorn, The Roadrunner, Wile E. Coyote, and dozens more. For nearly 50 years, he provided the voices for virtually every major character in the Warner Brothers cartoon stable. He earned the nickname, the Man of 1,000 Voices, and it wasn't much of an exaggeration. Blanc got his start in radio in Portland, Oregon in the late 1920s, and joined the Warner Brothers animation team in 1936. From there, he became the most prolific voice actor in the history of animation. Beyond Warner Brothers, he voiced Barney Rubble on The Flintstones and worked with Jack Benny on radio and television for decades. He kept working right up until his death from heart disease and emphysema in 1989 at the age of 81. His grave here at Beth Olam is one of the most visited in all of Los Angeles, and not just because of who he was, it's because of what his family chose as his epitaph. Visitors come from all over the world just to see those 3 famous words on his headstone. If you ever watched Looney Tunes as a kid, you already know what they say. Let's travel now to Glendale, just northeast of Los Angeles, to the most famous cemetery in the world, Forest Lawn Memorial Park. This 300-acre hillside sanctuary was the vision of a man named Hubert Eaton, who in 1917 set out to create a memorial park that was beautiful rather than bleak, filled with sculpture, stained glass, and manicured gardens rather than rows of somber headstones. He succeeded beyond anyone's imagination. Forest Lawn Glendale is home to replicas of Michelangelo's masterworks, chapels modeled after famous European churches, and a massive stained glass recreation of Leonardo da Vinci's Last Supper. And inside its crown jewel, the Great Mausoleum, rest some of the most famous people who ever lived. One of them is waiting for us right inside the main entrance. When you walk through the Memorial Terrace doors, the first thing you encounter is a soaring marble statue. This is the In Memoria figure, and it marks the final resting place of Dame Elizabeth Taylor. Few lives in Hollywood have been lived on a grander scale. Born in London to American parents, young Elizabeth was already a star by 12, thanks to her role in National Velvet. From there, she became one of the most celebrated actresses of the 20th century. Giant alongside James Dean, Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, Suddenly Last Summer, and the colossal production of Cleopatra, which nearly bankrupted a studio. She won the Academy Award for Best Actress twice, for Butterfield 8 in 1961, and for Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf in 1967. She was married 8 times to 7 men, twice to Richard Burton, her tempestuous co-star in Cleopatra. In later years, she became one of the earliest and most passionate advocates for AIDS research, founding the Elizabeth Taylor AIDS Foundation. Taylor died from congestive heart failure in 2011 at the age of 79. True to form, she left instructions that her funeral was to begin 15 minutes late. She wanted to be fashionably late, she said, one last time. Her crypt here in the Great Mausoleum places her among the grandest company in Hollywood's afterlife. Stepping back outside and driving up to the Hollywood Hills, we visit Forest Lawn's second location. And here we take a sharp turn from Golden Age glamour to something louder, faster, and a whole lot angrier. Back at Hollywood Forever Cemetery, near the lake, stands a striking bronze statue of a man in a wide-legged stance, playing a guitar. This is the memorial to Johnny Ramone, born John Cummings, the guitarist and driving force behind the Ramones. If there's a moment punk rock was born, it was 1974, when 4 guys from Queens, New York started playing 2-minute songs at furious speed at a club called CBGB. The Ramones didn't just start a band, they started a movement. Songs like Blitzkrieg Bop, I Wanna Be Sedated, and Sheena is a Punk Rocker stripped rock and roll down to its raw essentials and kicked open the door for everything that came after. Johnny was the engine. His relentless buzzsaw downstroke guitar style defined the Ramones' sound. Though commercial success eluded them during their active years, the band was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2002. Johnny was diagnosed with prostate cancer that same year. He passed away in 2004 at the age of 55. His friend Rob Zombie had originally commissioned a small statuette of Johnny as a gag Christmas gift. After Johnny's death, a full-sized bronze version was created and installed here at Hollywood Forever. His wife Linda holds his ashes. When she passes, they'll be interred together at this spot beside the lake. From punk rock, let us turn to the man who practically invented the Hollywood epic. Not far from the Fairbanks Memorial at Hollywood Forever, you'll find a substantial monument belonging to Cecil B. DeMille. If you've ever watched the 10 Commandments on television around Easter, and if you're watching this, chances are good that you have, then you've seen DeMille's crowning achievement. He was one of the founding fathers of Hollywood, quite literally. His first film, The Squaw Man, made in 1914, was one of the first feature-length movies shot in Hollywood. Over the next 4 decades, DeMille became synonymous with spectacle, biblical epics, historical dramas, and lavish productions on a scale nobody had attempted before. The 10 Commandments, Samson and Delilah, The Greatest Show on Earth, which won the Academy Award for Best Picture in 1953. He also appeared as himself in Billy Wilder's Sunset Boulevard, immortalized in that famous line, "All right, Mr. DeMille, I'm ready for my close-up." DeMille died of heart failure in 1959 at the age of 77. His monument here reflects the stature of a man who helped build an industry from the ground up. Let's make our way back inside the Great Mausoleum at Forest Lawn Glendale. Down the sanctuary of benediction, in a private alcove at the far end, rests someone who burned as bright as anyone in Hollywood and was gone before anyone was ready. Jean Harlow was the original blonde bombshell. In an era when screen sirens were almost exclusively brunettes, Harlow's platinum hair made her glow on screen like no one else. Howard Hughes cast her in his 1930 aviation epic Hell's Angels, and she became a sensation almost overnight. She was funny, she was bold, she was unapologetically sexy, a precursor to every blonde bombshell who followed, from Marilyn Monroe to Madonna. Films like Red Dust, Dinner at 8, and Libeled Lady showcased both her comedic gifts and her dramatic range. But tragedy stalked her. During the filming of Saratoga alongside Clark Gable in 1937, Harlow became desperately ill. She was suffering from kidney failure, and her condition deteriorated rapidly. She died on June 7, 1937. She was just 26 years old. Her mother, a devout Christian Scientist, has long been criticized for delaying medical treatment. Harlow's resting place here in the Great Mausoleum is marked with a simple, heartbreaking inscription chosen by her family. She lies just down the hall from Gable, her frequent co-star and close friend, who outlived her by more than 2 decades. Let's circle back now to Hillside Memorial Park, the beautiful cemetery where we visited Al Jolson earlier. Because right there in the main mausoleum, not far from that towering monument, rests one of the most beloved comedians in American history. Jack Benny mastered every medium the 20th century invented: vaudeville, radio, film, and television. His radio program, which ran from 1932 to 1955, was one of the most popular shows in the country, and his television show continued delighting audiences through 1965. Benny's comic persona was a masterpiece of construction: the perpetual 39-year-old, the miser who kept his money in a vault, the terrible violin player. In truth, he was a skilled violinist and one of the most generous men in Hollywood. His timing was legendary. He could get a bigger laugh from a long pause than most comedians could get from their best punchline. When a mugger pointed a gun at him and said, "Your money or your life," Benny just stood there in silence. When the mugger repeated the demand, Benny finally replied, "I'm thinking it over." It became one of the most famous jokes in comedy history. Benny died on December 26, 1974, from pancreatic cancer. He was 80. His funeral here at Hillside drew over 2,000 people, and the eulogy was delivered by his dear friend, Bob Hope. George Burns, Benny's lifelong best friend, was too grief-stricken to speak. It's fitting that Benny rests here at Hillside. After all, it was Benny who delivered the eulogy when the Jolson Memorial was dedicated in 1951. In this cemetery, old friends keep each other company. Now, we return to Hollywood forever for one of the most poignant stops on our tour. In 2017, a new pavilion was dedicated here, and in it rests a woman whose voice could break your heart and lift your spirits in the span of a single song. Judy Garland. She began performing as a toddler in vaudeville with her 2 older sisters. By 13, she had a contract with MGM, and a few years later she was cast as Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz. Over the Rainbow became one of the most beloved songs in the history of popular music, and it became Garland's signature for the rest of her life. She was more than Dorothy, of course. Meet Me in St. Louis, A Star is Born, which earned her an Oscar nomination, and a stunning dramatic turn in Judgment at Nuremberg, all showcased a talent that went far beyond the girl from Kansas. She received a special Tony Award in 1952, and her legendary 1961 concert recording, Judy at Carnegie Hall, won the Grammy for Album of the Year. But Garland's life was shadowed by the studio system that created her. MGM put her on pills to keep her thin, pills to keep her awake, pills to put her to sleep, starting when she was barely a teenager. She struggled with addiction for the rest of her life. In June 1969, while living in London, Garland was found dead from an accidental overdose of barbiturates. She was 47. For nearly 50 years, she was entombed at Ferncliff Cemetery in New York. Then, in early 2017, her family had her remains moved here to Hollywood forever, so the Garland family could be together. Her new resting place is a fitting tribute to one of Hollywood's most incandescent talents. Staying at Hollywood forever, let's step inside the Cathedral Mausoleum and walk to an alcove on the left side of the second corridor. Here, in a quiet corner, lies a man who was once the most famous person on the planet. Rudolph Valentino was the first true movie star, the original screen idol whose fame bordered on mass hysteria. Born in Italy, he came to America as a young man and worked his way from taxi dancer to the biggest name in silent film. The Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse in 1921 made him a star. The Sheikh made him a phenomenon. Women fainted in theaters. Men resented him so fiercely that a Chicago newspaper ran an editorial calling him a threat to American masculinity. In August of 1926, while in New York for the premiere of The Son of the Sheik, Valentino collapsed in his hotel room. Emergency surgery revealed a perforated gastric ulcer and a ruptured appendix. Peritonitis set in, and without modern antibiotics, there was nothing doctors could do. He died on August 23rd, at the age of 31. An estimated 100,000 people filed past his coffin in New York. Riots broke out. When his body was brought back to California, over 80,000 mourners gathered here at Hollywood Forever. His friend, screenwriter June Mathis, offered one of her own pre-purchased crypts as a temporary resting place. A grand memorial with life-size statues had been planned, but the funds never materialized, and the temporary crypt became permanent. For decades afterward, a mysterious woman dressed in black would appear at this spot on the anniversary of Valentino's death, leaving a single red rose. The tradition, which began as a publicity stunt in 1928, took on a life of its own, with various women continuing the ritual over the years. It remains one of the most enduring legends in all of Hollywood lore. Before we leave Hollywood Forever, let's walk back outside and across the grounds toward the Garden of Legends near the lake. Here rests a man who truly embodied the term matinee idol. Tyrone Power had the kind of face that seemed sculpted for the silver screen. Dark, handsome, and impossibly photogenic. He was one of 20th Century Fox's biggest stars through the late 1930s and 1940s, headlining adventures and dramas that packed theaters across the country. The Mark of Zorro, Blood and Sand, The Razor's Edge, Witness for the Prosecution. Power moved effortlessly between swashbucklers, romances, and serious drama. But what many people don't know is that at the height of his fame, with his career in full bloom, Power walked away from it all to serve his country. After Pearl Harbor, he enlisted in the United States Marine Corps, eventually becoming a pilot who flew cargo and transport missions in the Pacific Theater during some of the war's most intense campaigns, including operations during the battles of Iwo Jima and Okinawa. He returned to Hollywood after the war and picked up right where he left off. Power was on location in Spain, filming Solomon and Sheba in 1958, when he suffered a massive heart attack during a dueling scene with George Sanders. He was just 44 years old. His death stunned Hollywood, and the unfinished film had to be reshot with Yul Brynner in his role. Power's resting place here at Hollywood Forever is a popular stop for fans of classic cinema, a reminder that some of the biggest stars burned out far too young. Let's take a short drive to Forest Lawn Hollywood Hills, the sister cemetery up in the hills above Burbank. It's here that we find a man who turned the piano into a spectacle. Liberace, born Wladysław Valentino Liberace in Wisconsin, and yes, he was named after Rudolph Valentino, was the highest-paid entertainer in the world during the 1950s and 1960s. His Las Vegas residencies were legendary. He played classical piano with extraordinary skill, but what audiences came for was the show. The candelabra, the sequined capes, the fur coats, the rhinestone-encrusted everything. He once drove a mirror-tiled Rolls-Royce onto the stage. His television show, which ran through much of the 1950s, brought his flamboyant style into living rooms across America. He won 2 Emmy Awards and sold out concerts around the world for decades. Liberace was a showman without equal, and he knew it. His famous response to critics was, "I cried all the way to the bank." He was also a deeply private man in some respects. He never publicly acknowledged being gay, and he sued anyone who suggested it. Liberace died of pneumonia, brought on by complications of AIDS in February 1987, at the age of 67. His resting place here at Forest Lawn Hollywood Hills is marked with a level of flair you might expect from a man who never did anything quietly. Back at Forest Lawn Glendale now, and deeper into the Great Mausoleum, we come to one of Hollywood's great love stories, and one of its greatest tragedies. In the Sanctuary of Trust, side by side, rest Clark Gable and Carole Lombard. Gable was the king of Hollywood, and that wasn't just a nickname. It was how the industry itself crowned him after a newspaper poll in 1938. He was rugged, charming, and magnetic in a way that transcended any single role, though one role above all cemented his place in history: Rhett Butler in Gone with the Wind. Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn. a line so perfectly delivered it became the most famous in movie history. He won the Academy Award for It Happened One Night in 1935 and earned nominations for Mutiny on the Bounty and Gone with the Wind. Lombard was his match in every way: beautiful, funny, fearless, and famously profane. She was the highest-paid actress in Hollywood by the late 1930s, a queen of screwball comedy. My Man Godfrey earned her an Oscar nomination. She and Gable married in 1939, and by all accounts, it was a genuine love match. Then came the war. After Pearl Harbor, Lombard threw herself into selling war bonds, raising over $2 million at a rally in her home state of Indiana. She was scheduled to return to Los Angeles by train, but she was impatient to get home. A coin toss decided the route. They would fly. On January 16, 1942, shortly after a refueling stop in Las Vegas, the plane struck a mountain. Everyone on board was killed. Carole Lombard was 33. She was honored as the first woman to die in the line of duty during the war. Gable was devastated. He enlisted in the Army Air Corps and flew combat missions over Europe, as if daring fate to reunite them. It didn't. He came home, kept making pictures, and married twice more, but friends said he never got over Carole. Gable died of a heart attack in 1960 at 59 and was placed right here beside her, together again, as he'd always wanted. Stepping out of the Great Mausoleum and making the drive back up to Forest Lawn Hollywood Hills, we find a woman who could go toe-to-toe with any man on screen, and usually win. Bette Davis was not interested in being pretty. She was interested in being great. And she was. Her performances crackled with intelligence, ferocity, and a willingness to be ugly if the story demanded it. She was the first person to earn 10 Academy Award nominations for acting. She won twice, for Dangerous in 1935 and Jezebel in 1938. All About Eve gave her one of her most quoted lines. And her turn as the deranged Baby Jane Hudson in Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, opposite her real-life rival Joan Crawford, remains one of the most unsettling performances in film history. Davis worked constantly for over 5 decades, nearly 100 films, plus television work well into the 1980s. She survived breast cancer and a stroke, and kept acting through both. Bette Davis died in France from breast cancer in 1989, at the age of 81, while on her way to a film festival honoring her career. She once said she'd like her epitaph to read, "She did it the hard way." Her resting place here at Forest Lawn Hollywood Hills is a quieter affair than you might expect from a woman who lived so loudly. But then, Davis never needed a monument to be remembered. Not far from Bette Davis, also at Forest Lawn Hollywood Hills, rests a man who was the very definition of Hollywood royalty, and who had a second career as a genuine American hero. Jimmy Stewart's aw shucks voice and lanky frame made him one of the most beloved actors in the history of cinema. He won the Academy Award for The Philadelphia Story in 1941 and earned 4 more nominations over his career. Alfred Hitchcock used him in 4 films: Rope, Rear Window, The Man Who Knew Too Much, and Vertigo. Frank Capra made him the face of American decency in Mr. Smith Goes to Washington and It's a Wonderful Life. That last one, George Bailey standing on a bridge on Christmas Eve, has become as much a part of American holiday tradition as the tree itself. What many people don't know is that Stewart was also a decorated military officer. He enlisted in the Army Air Corps during World War II, flew 20 combat missions over Europe as a bomber pilot, and rose to the rank of Brigadier General in the Air Force Reserve. He received the Distinguished Flying Cross and the Croix de Guerre, among other honors. Stewart returned to Hollywood after the war and kept working for another 4 decades, making westerns, comedies, and thrillers. His final role was voicing the lovable Wiley Burp in An American Tail, Fievel Goes West. Stewart passed away from a pulmonary embolism in 1997 at the age of 89. He rests here beside his wife Gloria on a hillside with a view stretching all the way to the distant shimmer of the city below. Down the hill at Forest Lawn Glendale, tucked away in a small private garden near the Great Mausoleum, is the final resting place of a man whose imagination shaped the childhoods of millions. A statue of the Little Mermaid marks the entrance to the garden, a quiet clue that you've found the right spot. Walt Disney didn't just create cartoons, he created worlds. Mickey Mouse, Snow White, Fantasia, Disneyland, each one a revolution in its own right. Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, released in 1937, was the first full-length animated feature film, and the industry said it would bankrupt him. Instead, it made him a legend. Over his career, Disney won 22 competitive Academy Awards, more than any other individual in history, a record that still stands. And then there was Disneyland, which opened in 1955 in Anaheim and changed the concept of entertainment forever. Disney was a relentless perfectionist and a visionary, though his personal politics and management style remained subjects of debate. He was a heavy smoker for most of his life, and in November 1966, he was diagnosed with lung cancer. He died on December 15, 1966, at the age of 65, just 10 days after his final surgery. His passing was such a shock that an urban legend sprang up claiming he'd had himself cryogenically frozen. He hadn't. He was cremated, and his ashes were interred right here in this garden, which remains one of the most visited spots at Forest Lawn, even though it's tucked away and easy to miss if you don't know where to look. Returning to Forest Lawn Glendale's Freedom Mausoleum, we find one of the warmest partnerships in entertainment history. George Burns and Gracie Allen were married for 38 years, performed together for even longer, and made each other funnier than either could have been alone. Gracie was the comic genius. Her dizzy, illogical observations were actually the product of razor-sharp timing and meticulous delivery. George was the straight man, the one with the cigar and the patient look, feeding her setups and letting her demolish them. Their radio show ran from 1932 to 1950, and they transitioned to television with The George Burns and Gracie Allen Show, which ran until 1958. When Gracie retired due to heart problems, George tried going on without her, but it was never the same. Gracie died of a heart attack in 1964 at the age of 58, and Burns was gutted. He visited her crypt here at Forest Lawn regularly for the rest of his life. He once said the only thing he ever changed about her memorial was the inscription, from "Goodnight Gracie" to "Together Again," because he always knew he'd join her. And he did. Burns reinvented himself as a solo act in his 70s, winning the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor for The Sunshine Boys in 1976 at the age of 80. He worked steadily for another 2 decades, celebrating his centennial birthday in January 1996 before passing away just weeks later in March. He was 100 years old. He was placed right here beside Gracie, just as he'd planned, together again. Deep within the Great Mausoleum at Forest Lawn Glendale, in a private section that the general public cannot access, rests the King of Pop. Michael Jackson's crypt here is in the Holly Terrace wing, behind locked doors, surrounded by stained glass windows and marble. The Jackson family purchased an entire alcove, reportedly paying $590,000 for the crypt alone. The total cost of his funeral and burial exceeded $1 million. It was a send-off worthy of a man who sold more records than almost anyone who ever lived. Thriller, released in 1982, remains the best-selling album of all time, with estimated sales exceeding 66 million copies worldwide. The music video for the title track, a 14-minute horror movie directed by John Landis, transformed what a music video could be. Before that, there was the Jackson 5, where a preposterously talented child from Gary, Indiana, lit up television screens on The Ed Sullivan Show. After that came Off the Wall, Bad, Dangerous, hit after hit, moonwalk after moonwalk, 13 #1 singles as a solo artist. He won 13 Grammy Awards and was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame twice, once with the Jackson 5 and once as a solo artist. His later years were marked by controversy, eccentricity, and physical transformation that became tabloid fodder around the world. On June 25, 2009, Jackson was found unresponsive at his Los Angeles home. He was pronounced dead at the age of 50, the victim of a cardiac arrest caused by an overdose of the anesthetic propofol, administered by his personal physician. Dr. Conrad Murray was later convicted of involuntary manslaughter. Jackson's memorial service at the Staples Center was watched by an estimated worldwide audience of over 2 billion people. His resting place here at Forest Lawn is not open to the public, but fans gather outside Holly Terrace year-round, leaving flowers and messages. Even in death, the security around Michael Jackson remains tight. Some things about his life never changed. And so we come to our final stop. We're still here at Forest Lawn Glendale, in a walled and gated garden within the Great Mausoleum complex, a private sanctuary called the Gardens of Memory. Behind these gates, in the columbarium of eternal light, rests the man the American Film Institute named the greatest male screen legend of all time, Humphrey Bogart. He wasn't the most handsome leading man in Hollywood. He wasn't the tallest or the most athletic. What he had was something rarer, a face that looked like it had lived, and a voice that sounded like it meant every word. Bogart came up through the New York stage and spent years in Hollywood playing small-time heavies and second-fiddle gangsters before everything changed in 1941. High Sierra showed the world he could carry a picture. The Maltese Falcon, released the same year, made him a star. And then came Casablanca. Sam plays As Time Goes By. The fog rolls across the tarmac. Rick Blaine puts Ilsa on a plane and walks into the night. It is, by almost any measure, the greatest Hollywood film ever made. Bogart won the Academy Award for The African Queen in 1952 and earned nominations for Casablanca and The Caine Mutiny. He married 4 times. His last marriage, to the actress Lauren Bacall, was the one that stuck. They'd met on the set of To Have and Have Not in 1944, when she was 19 and he was 44. Their chemistry, on screen and off, became the stuff of legend. In their years together, they made 4 films and built a life that became one of Hollywood's rare, genuinely happy marriages. Bogart was a heavy smoker and drinker, and in 1956 he was diagnosed with esophageal cancer. He fought it for over a year before dying on January 14, 1957, at the age of 57. At his memorial service, John Huston delivered the eulogy. Bacall placed a small gold whistle in the urn with his ashes, a reference to their first film together, when she looked at him and said, "You know how to whistle, don't you, Steve? You just put your lips together and blow." He rests here now, in this quiet garden, behind walls that keep the world at a respectful distance. It seems right. Bogart was never one for making a fuss. And with that, friends, our tour comes to an end. 20 legends, resting in the hills and valleys of Los Angeles, each one marked by a monument that tells you something about who they were, or who the people who love them wish them to be remembered as. Thank you for walking with us today. Until next time.